I want you to close your eyes for a second. Assuming you're in a safe place to do so, of course.
Right. Definitely don't do this if you're driving or something.
Yeah, please don't. But if you can, I really want you to picture the North Atlantic Ocean. And I need you to strip away, like, literally everything you know about the modern world.
You mean all the safety nets?
Exactly. Erase the commercial jets flying overhead at 30,000 feet. Erase the digital maps.
And, the GPS trackers pinging every few seconds.
Right. No satellite phones, no Coast Guard rescue helicopters waiting on standby. I want you to imagine this ocean in the dead of winter, but in the year 1854.
That is a terrifying mental space to be in.
It really is. You're hovering above the water, hundreds of miles from any shoreline. It's night. The kind of absolute suffocating darkness that you can almost feel pressing against your skin. It's heavy, it's damp.
And freezing.
Oh, unbelievably cold. The air is so cold it physically burns your lungs when you draw a breath. And the wind is just screaming.
It's a constant deafening roar.
Yeah, whipping the freezing black water into these massive, chaotic swells. We're talking walls of water, 20, maybe 30 feet high, just crashing into each other in the dark.
And out there's literally nothing else.
Nothing. No lights, no radio static, no human voices, just a terrifying, endless void. In this era, the moment a ship sailed past the horizon, out of sight of land, it basically stepped off the map.
It vanished from the earth.
Right. The people on board were completely, utterly alone. Sealed in a wooden or an iron box, entirely at the mercy of an environment that could kill them in minutes, until they hopefully, miraculously, appeared on the other side of the world.
The psychological weight of that isolation is just, it's something we really struggle to comprehend today.
Because we're so connected now.
Exactly. We live in an era of constant tethering. We can text someone on another continent in a fraction of a second. But mid-19th century navigation was an exercise in plunging into a literal black box.
The ultimate unknown.
The ocean was an abyss. Whatever happened out there in the freezing dark, whether it was a shattered mast, a disease outbreak, or a catastrophic sinking, it stayed out there.
Nobody was coming to save you.
No. There was no calling for help. You survived on the skill of your crew and the strength of your hull, or you did not survive at all.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that terrifying reality brings us to the focus of our deep dive today.
And it's a chilling one.
It's beyond chilling. We aren't just looking at a historical footnote here. We are looking at a real-life horror story that fundamentally shook the Western world. We're examining the SS City of Glasgow.
The first great loss of a modern passenger steamship.
Yeah. We are talking about a marvel of its era, a machine that people genuinely believe had conquered nature. It steamed into the winter Atlantic, carrying hundreds of souls.
Men, women, children, the crew.
And it was simply swallowed by the deep. No witnesses. No distress signals, no floating debris.
Just a massive iron leviathan sailing into the freezing blackness and never coming out.
It's wild to even think about.
It really remains one of the most chilling maritime ghost stories in recorded history. And to truly grasp the sheer terror of this disappearance and the absolute shockwave of panic it sent through the public on both sides of the Atlantic, we have to look at the psychological armor of the Victorian era.
They were so confident.
So confident. People thought this specific ship was invincible. The society that built the city of Glasgow truly believed they had engineered their way out of the ancient terrors of the deep.
Right, and you cannot have a tragedy of this unimaginable scale without a massive foundation of technological hubris leading up to it. So before we look at the ghost ship itself, let's look at the machine. Where did this absolute confidence come from? Take me back to the shipyards.
Well, the story begins in the clanging, smoke-filled industrial heart of Scotland. She was launched on February 28, 1850.
Built by a pretty famous firm, right?
Yeah, built by the renowned engineering firm of Todd and McGregor in Partick, Glasgow.
Right.
This was a shipyard that was pushing the absolute boundaries of what was physically possible at the time.
They were the innovators.
Exactly. When the city of Glasgow slid into the water, she was an absolute giant for her time. We're looking at a vessel measuring 227.5 feet long.
Wow.
And nearly 33 feet wide.
Over 200 feet of ship. For 1850, I mean, that is a staggering amount of mass to keep afloat.
The dimensions were impressive, sure, but the true revolution was the metallurgy and the propulsion. The shift happening here was monumental.
Because before this, it was all wood and sails, right?
Mostly,
Oh,
yeah. Up until this specific window in history, if you were braving the North Atlantic, you were almost certainly entrusting your life to a wooden ship. And if that ship did utilize steam power, it relied on giant paddle wheels strapped to the sides of the hull.
Which, thinking about the environment we just described, those 20-foot rogue swells, the screaming wind giant wooden wheels spinning on the outside of a ship seems like an incredibly fragile, almost naive design.
Oh, fragile is an understatement. Paddle wheels were notoriously vulnerable in heavy ocean swells. The hydrodynamics were fundamentally flawed for deep ocean transit.
How so? Like, what happens when a wave hits them?
Well, if a massive wave caught a ship and rolled it severely to one side, one of those massive paddle wheels would lift entirely out of the water. It would just be violently spinning in the empty air.
Oh, I see.
Meanwhile, the wheel on the opposite side would be plunged far too deep into the ocean, encountering immense, crushing resistance.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. The strain on the engines was catastrophic, and the ship would lose almost all forward momentum and steering capability. But the city of Glasgow solved this by utilizing a single screw.
A massive iron propeller.
Exactly, a massive iron propeller.
Mounted at the back of the ship, completely submerged.
Tucked safely under the waterline, deep at the stern. So it was totally shielded from the violent surface action of the waves. And to turn that massive iron screw, Todd and McGregor installed a towering two-cylinder beam engine.
Okay, break down that engine for me, because I'm trying to picture it. When you say a two-cylinder beam engine, what does that actually look like and sound like deep in the belly of this ship?
Picture a cathedral of moving iron. A beam engine uses massive overhead metal beams that rock back and forth on a central pivot, almost like giant seesaws.
Giant iron seesaws, got it.
Right. Steam pressure from the coal-fired boilers pushes giant pistons up and down. These pistons connect to the rocking beams, which then translate that massive up and down mechanical energy into rotational energy to spin the propeller shaft.
The sheer force of that must have been incredible.
It was. The heat in that engine room would be suffocating. The noise would be a deafening, rhythmic, earth-shaking thud. The entire ship would vibrate with the sheer kinetic violence of those two cylinders firing.
And yet they still kept sails on it.
Yes, as a crucial safety net, because engineers were still deeply paranoid about transitioning away from the age of sail, the ship carried a full complement of sails on 3 masts.
So it's a hybrid machine. If the steam engine blows a gasket or a piston shatters, they can just unfurl the canvas and sail home.
That was the idea, yeah. That combination of an impenetrable iron hull, a revolutionary submerged propeller, and a backup sail plan made her appear utterly indestructible.
It's like the Titanic before the Titanic.
Very much so. Furthermore, she wasn't just an engineering triumph. She was a ruthless commercial success. The records show this was the first transatlantic steamship to operate profitably without relying on government mail subsidies.
Wow, so she was making real money purely on transit.
She proved that the future of global travel was forged in iron and powered by steam.
That commercial success brings up something I really want to dig into, because it shifts this from a story about a machine to a story about human desperation. A ship like this doesn't turn a massive profit just by carrying wealthy merchants.
Not at all. The profit margin was built on the backs of the most vulnerable people in Europe. The city of Glasgow unlocked a deeply lucrative, entirely new human market. She was the very first steamship specifically fitted to carry steerage passengers across the Atlantic.
Steerage, the cheapest tickets.
Right. She brought the miracle of relatively fast industrialized steam travel to the impoverished immigrants.
Before an iron giant like this existed, what was the reality for someone fleeing famine or persecution in Europe? If you were a poor immigrant in the 1840s, how did you get to America?
You were condemned to the traditional sailing vessels. The historical record refers to these vessels with a deeply chilling but entirely accurate moniker. They were called coffin ships.
Coffin ships. I mean, you don't get a name like that just because the food is bad. What made them so lethal?
It was an endurance test of the most brutal, degrading kind. These were often older, rotting, heavily used cargo ships that were hastily retrofitted to cram as many human bodies into the wooden bowels as physically possible.
Just packing them in like cargo.
Exactly. Immigrants were packed into damp, lightless holds with virtually no ventilation, and the journey relied entirely on the wind. If the wind died, the ship simply sat in the middle of the ocean for days, or even weeks.
Just drifting.
A crossing could easily take a month, sometimes 2.
2 months trapped in the dark of a rotting wooden hull. I can't even imagine the smell, the claustrophobia.
And in those stagnant conditions, disease exploded. Typhus, commonly called ship fever, and cholera ran rampant through the tight, unwashed quarters.
It's basically a floating incubator for disease.
It was. The death tolls were staggering. Bodies were routinely tossed overboard. Purchasing a ticket on a coffin ship was a literal gamble with your life. You were entirely at the mercy of the weather, the captain's rationing of foul drinking water, and the microscopic pathogens breeding in the damp wood around you.
So let's put ourselves in the shoes of an immigrant family in 1854. You spent your entire life hearing whispered horror stories about the coffin ships.
They were legendary for all the wrong reasons.
Right. You have saved every penny, sold everything you own, and you arrive at the docks in Liverpool. And instead of a rotting wooden boat, you look up and see the SS City of Glasgow. You see a towering wall of impenetrable black iron.
It must have looked like something from the future.
Exactly. You see smoke billowing from a massive funnel representing industrial power. It promises to cut a grueling month-long nightmare down to a 2-week sprint. The psychological impact of walking up that gangplank must have been overwhelming.
It represented a profound sense of salvation. The iron hull was a Victorian promise that human ingenuity could finally protect us from the ancient, chaotic terrors of the natural world.
They really thought they had beaten nature.
They believed the metal walls would keep the ocean out and the steam engine would outrun the storms.
I have to challenge that mindset, though, looking at it through a modern lens. Taking people who are already traumatized by the ocean, putting them inside a massive, unproven iron tube, filling the bottom of that tube with thousands of tons of highly combustible coal, lighting roaring fires and sealing them in.
It sounds insane when you put it like that.
Right. The city of Glasgow sounds less like a passenger ship and more like a 19th century spaceship. It's this incredibly complex, highly volatile machine venturing into an environment where a single mechanical failure means instant death.
The spaceship analogy is incredibly apt. The environment outside that iron hull, the freezing, turbulent, crushing expanse of the Atlantic, was instantly lethal to human life.
Just like the vacuum of space.
Exactly. Inside the hull, you had an enclosed, mechanized ecosystem, artificially keeping everyone alive. But the crucial, horrifying difference is telemetry.
Communication.
Right. A modern spacecraft is in constant communication with a control center. Engineers are monitoring every valve, every pressure gauge, every oxygen level from thousands of miles away.
The city of Glasgow possessed no such tether. Once those mooring lines were slipped, the umbilical cord was severed.
You were entirely on your own.
Which brings us to the precipice of the disaster. When you have a machine that complex, carrying that much human hope, the moment it leaves the dock, the stakes are astronomical. What did that final departure actually look like?
Well, we must look at the human manifest to understand the scale of the impending horror. It's March 1st, 1854. The ship is moored in Liverpool, England, preparing to steam across the ocean to Philadelphia.
I can just imagine the scene.
The docks are freezing, chaotic, and loud. Stevedores are loading cargo, coal is being shoveled into the bunkers, and steam is venting from the pressure valves.
How many souls are stepping off the edge of the map that day?
The official records indicate 480 lives were on board.
Almost 500 people packed into that iron cylinder.
A densely packed floating city. The passenger list totaled 404 individuals. In the upper decks, enjoying the relative luxury and warmth of the cabin and saloon classes, were 111 wealthy or middle-class passengers.
And below them?
Deep below them, huddled in the steerage compartments, were 293 immigrants, banking their entire futures on the promise of the iron hull. Commanding this vessel was Captain K. Morrison, an experienced mariner overseeing a crew of 76 men.
And the ship wasn't just carrying people. The physical weight of the vessel plays a huge role in how a ship handles the ocean. What else were they hauling?
The cargo holds were packed to capacity with roughly 1,200 tons of general merchandise and provisions.
1,200 tons? That is incredibly heavy.
That immense weight pushed the ship low into the water, maximizing the efficiency of the submerged propeller, but also requiring the engines to work fiercely to push all that mass through the swells.
So you have the wealthy drinking hot tea in the saloon, the immigrants settling into the tight bunks of steerage, the crew covered in soot deep in the boiler rooms, and thousands of pounds of cargo sitting in the pitch black.
A whole microcosm of society.
The great iron propeller starts churning the freezing water of the Mersey River. The ship points its bow west toward America, and they steam away from the coast.
And that departure, that fading plume of black smoke against the gray English sky, is the very last time any of those 480 human beings were ever seen by the rest of the world.
Man, the timeline of a maritime disaster in the 1850s is so much more agonizing than a modern catastrophe. Today, an airplane drops off radar, and within minutes, the entire world knows.
Alarms go off immediately.
Right. News networks break in. But in 1854, tragedy wasn't instantaneous for the people waiting on land. It was a slow, suffocating bleed of hope. Based on her typical speed, when was the city of Glasgow expected to dock in Philadelphia?
They were expected to arrive around March 25th. That gives us a window of about 3.5 weeks for the crossing.
Put us on the docks in Philadelphia on March 25th. What does that look like?
The Delaware River docks are bustling. Boarding house owners are waiting to solicit the new immigrants. Merchants are waiting for the 1,200 tons of European goods to stock their shelves.
And the families.
Yes, families are standing in the freezing wind, looking out at the water, waiting to see the familiar black funnel of the Glasgow. But the sun sets on March 25th. The horizon remains empty.
Initially, that isn't a cause for total panic, though, right? I mean, it's the North Atlantic in winter. Weather happens.
Exactly. The rationalizations begin immediately. You tell yourself they hit strong headwinds.
Yeah.
The ocean was rough, so the captain throttled back the engines to save coal.
They're just taking it slow.
Right. It is entirely normal for a winter crossing to be delayed by a few days.
So the families go home. They try to sleep. They return to the docks on March 26th. Still nothing. Just flat gray water and seagulls. March 27th. March 28th.
Every day that passes is heavier than the last.
The days start violently ticking by. Every single sunset that passes without a sign of smoke on the horizon, the dread starts to curdle in the stomach of every person waiting on that dock.
What's fascinating here is how the absolute silence is the true psychological torture. The families are trapped in an information vacuum.
You literally just don't know.
Right. A telegram couldn't be sent from the middle of the Atlantic saying, "We hit a severe gale, our sails are torn, expect us 4 days late." There's only the wind, the freezing water, and the agonizing wait.
Think about the terrifying contrast between the silence on the land and the reality out on the water. I want you to imagine physically being on that ship in the days leading up to the disaster.
It's a claustrophobic thought.
You are deep inside this iron leviathan. You can hear the constant agonizing creaking and groaning of the metal plates as thousands of tons of water crash against the hull. You feel the deep, rhythmic, bone-rattling thrum of that massive two-cylinder engine vibrating through the wooden floorboards beneath your feet.
The ship is alive.
Exactly. It's suffocatingly hot near the boiler rooms, but freezing cold up on the exposed deck. You are eating dinner, you are sleeping in your bunk, entirely unaware that the mathematical probability of your survival has just hit zero.
You're just living your life.
You are sailing straight out of the history books and into an eternal abyss, and you have absolutely no idea.
The erasure is what makes this case so deeply unsettling to maritime historians. We are talking about thousands of tons of iron, coal, and cargo. We are talking about 480 breathing, dreaming, terrified human beings. And they simply cease to exist.
No trace at all.
None. The ship didn't limp into a port in Nova Scotia. It didn't strike a reef near the coast where bodies washed ashore. There was no trail of shattered lifeboats, no floating wooden barrels, no lifebelts found the next day.
It's like a magic trick, but horrific.
The ocean opened up, swallowed the entire ecosystem whole, and closed back over it without leaving a single trace on the surface.
Because there are no survivors, not a single person who lived to tell us what happened, we are left to play detective. We have to reconstruct the nightmare from the environmental context of that specific winter and the theories that followed.
And those theories are grim.
Extremely. The theories put forth by the naval experts of the time are horrifying because they are rooted in the brutal, physical reality of what the ocean was actually doing in March of 1854.
The historical context and the weather data give us a very narrow set of puzzles to piece together. Investigators zeroed in on 3 primary theories of doom.
Choose your own nightmare.
Pretty much. Each one represents a different, highly plausible flavor of absolute nightmare.
Let's analyze Theory 1. This is widely considered the most likely scenario by historians, and it stems directly from a chilling piece of eyewitness testimony from a ship that was sailing the exact same route.
The testimony came from the crew of the City of Manchester.
Another steamship.
Yes. This was the sister ship to the City of Glasgow, built by the same yard, traversing the same shipping lanes, and arriving in port shortly after the Glasgow was supposed to make landfall. The captain and crew of the Manchester reported encountering an incredibly dangerous, highly unusual oceanic anomaly.
What did they see?
They sailed into massive, dense fields of pack ice, interspersed with towering, jagged icebergs.
In the primary shipping lanes.
Yes. The ice had drifted much further south and was packed far denser than any mariner would have anticipated for that time of year.
Before we put the city of Glasgow into this scenario, explain the physical difference between pack ice and an iceberg, because I think people confuse the two. How do they threaten a ship differently?
Well, an iceberg is a massive floating mountain of freshwater ice that has broken off a glacier. Most of its mass is hidden beneath the surface. It is a solid, immovable object of immense density.
Like hitting a brick wall.
Exactly. Striking an iceberg is a kinetic event, a sudden catastrophic collision of momentum against an unyielding wall.
And pack ice.
Pack ice, however, is frozen seawater. It forms vast, floating plains of jagged, shifting ice floes. When a ship gets trapped in pack ice, the danger isn't a sudden crash. The danger is the immense, slow-moving pressure of miles of ice shifting with the ocean currents, squeezing the hull of the ship like a vice until the structural integrity fails.
Let's build the mental image of the iceberg collision, because the sensory details are terrifying. It's the middle of the night, pitch black. The city of Glasgow is steaming forward at full speed.
Because they have a schedule to keep.
Right. This is a commercial vessel running on a tight schedule, and the captain likely believes the iron hull is robust enough to brush aside smaller chunks of ice. They have no radar, no sonar. Just a few freezing men standing on the bow, straining their eyes against the biting wind, trying to distinguish the blackness of an iceberg from the blackness of the night sky.
The ambient air temperature has plummeted. The ocean spray splashing over the bow is instantly freezing to the rigging, coating the ropes in thick layers of heavy ice. Deep below, the engine is roaring, pushing thousands of tons of iron and cargo forward with immense kinetic energy.
And then, looming out of the void, just yards away, is a towering wall of ancient, hardened ice. The lookouts scream, but the ship is moving far too fast, and a single screw propeller takes time to reverse.
There's simply too much mass to turn.
The horror of an iron hull striking a mountain of ice is entirely different from a wooden ship. A wooden ship might splinter and crunch. What happens to Victorian iron in freezing temperatures when it hits an immovable object?
The metallurgy of the 1850s is the fatal flaw here. Early iron, especially when subjected to freezing temperatures, becomes highly brittle.
It doesn't bend, it snaps. Right. When the bow of the city of Glasgow slammed into the iceberg, it wouldn't have just dented. The immense kinetic energy of the collision would cause the brittle iron plates to shatter and buckle inward. The rivets holding the massive plates together would violently pop under the shearing force, sounding like cannon fire in the dark.
Oh man, just the sound of that.
The ocean would instantly tear open a massive, jagged gash along the side of the hull.
The speed of the sinking in this scenario is what makes it so utterly lethal. We are not talking about a slow, cinematic sinking over 3 hours like the Titanic.
No, it would be instantaneous and violently chaotic.
Yeah.
The freezing Atlantic water would rush into the lower decks under immense crushing pressure. The massive influx of water on one side of the ship would cause it to list or tilt violently and immediately.
Throwing everyone off balance.
The sudden angle would throw people from their bunks. The oil lamps lighting the corridors would shatter or extinguish, plunging the sinking, groaning ship into absolute pitch darkness as the freezing water surged down the hallways.
The sheer suffocating panic. Think about the 293 immigrants in steerage. They're trapped deep in the bottom of the ship, in the dark. They are trying to climb up steep, tilting wooden staircases as a wall of freezing water rises around their ankles,
And then their waists.
dragging them back down into the hold.
And even if you miraculously managed to fight your way up to the main deck, the situation was completely mathematically hopeless. The theory posits that the sinking was so rapid, perhaps a matter of minutes, that the crew had absolutely no time to organize, untie, and launch the heavy wooden lifeboats. The deck would be tilting at an impossible angle.
And let's say they did get a lifeboat into the water. What then?
They are dropping a small wooden boat into a turbulent sea filled with jagged, grinding chunks of pack ice in the middle of a freezing winter night. The wind chill alone would be lethal. If you went into the water, the shock of the freezing ocean causes your muscles to instantly seize.
You can't even swim.
You gasp, inhaling seawater. Hypothermia shuts down your organs in minutes. It was an absolute death sentence, regardless of whether you stayed trapped in the iron hull or plunged into the icy water.
That is the sudden, violent shock of the iceberg theory. 1 minute you are sleeping, listening to the comforting thud of the engine, and 10 minutes later you are plummeting into the abyssal zone. But the investigators had a second theory.
Yes, theory 2 is almost the complete opposite in terms of psychological pacing.
Right, it is not a sudden, violent shock. It is a slow, agonizing descent into madness. Theory 2 explores a catastrophic structural failure in the middle of a storm.
We have to remember that while Todd and McGregor were brilliant engineers, iron-hulled ships were still entirely in their infancy. The long-term metallurgical stress of constant, massive ocean swells pounding against rigid, riveted iron plates was not fully understood by science yet.
It was essentially an ongoing experiment.
Exactly. Some marine architects of the era theorized that the extraordinary fields of pack ice reported by the Manchester didn't sink the Glasgow in a single cinematic collision. Instead, they proposed that navigating through hundreds of miles of grinding pack ice severely battered the relatively new iron plates over a period of days.
Just slowly wearing it down.
The constant impact weakened the joints, popping rivets one by one, causing massive, unmanageable leaks that the ship's pumps simply couldn't keep up with.
So instead of hitting a wall and sinking in 10 minutes, they are just slowly, methodically being beaten to death by the ice and the waves, watching the water rise inch by inch in the cargo hold.
And the alternative failure within this structural theory is even more terrifying, and it involves the very thing that made the ship so modern.
The propeller shaft.
Right. The single submerged screw propeller was their great innovation, but from an engineering standpoint, it was a terrifying single point of failure. The massive iron shaft connecting that roaring two-cylinder steam engine to the heavy propeller outside the ship was under immense constant torque.
Twisting and turning against the ocean.
It was straining against the resistance of the water every single second. If there was a microfracture in the iron of that shaft and a massive wave violently lifted the stern of the ship, the sudden change in resistance could cause that massive iron shaft to violently snap.
I want to focus on what that exact moment would feel like for the passengers. You have been on this ship for over a week. You have grown entirely accustomed to the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the engine.
It becomes background noise.
It is the heartbeat of the ship. It is the only thing pushing you toward America and safety. And then suddenly, there is a horrific, shrieking sound of grinding metal deep below the floorboards. A massive, violent shudder knocks everyone off their feet. And then, dead silence.
The engine stops.
Right.
The heartbeat dies. And in that singular moment, you are no longer a cutting-edge marvel of steam propulsion. You are just thousands of tons of dead iron adrift in the middle of the North Atlantic.
Because without propulsion, you lose all ability to steer the ship. You can't point the bow into the waves to cut through them.
The hydrodynamics of a dead ship are terrifying. Without forward momentum to maintain rudder control, the ocean instantly takes over. The wind and the swells will naturally push the ship broadside to the waves.
Meaning the long side of the ship is exposed to the crashing water.
Right. The ship gets caught in the trough, the deep valley between the massive swells.
And when a massive wave hits the broadside of a ship, the rolling motion begins.
And it is a violent, deeply unnatural roll. The ship would lift heavily to one side as a wave lifted it, and then violently snap back to the other side as it slid down into the next trough. Everything not bolted down would become a lethal projectile.
Even the cargo.
Especially the cargo. Those 1,200 tons of merchandise would likely break loose, violently shifting from port to starboard with every roll. That massive shifting weight acts as a pendulum, exacerbating the roll until the ship simply capsizes, flipping over entirely.
The psychological torture of the broken shaft scenario is immense. It's not a 10-minute panic like the iceberg. It is hours or perhaps days of sheer, unadulterated terror. You are trapped in an iron box, adrift. The storm is howling outside. The ship is violently pitching side to side.
In the dark.
You are plunged into darkness as the rolling makes it impossible to keep lamps lit. You know the hull is failing under the stress. You know the water is slowly rising in the bilges. And, with absolute chilling certainty that absolutely no one is coming to save you.
You're just waiting for the end.
You are just sitting in the freezing dark, listening to the groaning metal, waiting for the one massive rogue wave that finally pushes you over the edge and sends you to the bottom.
It is the complete and utter loss of human agency. The ocean is indifferent to the iron hull or the sophisticated steam engine. You are returned to the absolute mercy of physics and fluid dynamics.
And then the investigators floated Theory 3. This one taps into a completely different primal fear. The fire below.
Fire was the lurking, ever-present dread of the early steam age.
It's so ironic being surrounded by ocean but terrified of fire.
To power those massive beam engines for a transatlantic crossing, a ship required colossal amounts of fuel. Deep in the absolute bottom of the ship, beneath the waterline, were bunker compartments packed with thousands of tons of raw coal.
We tend to think of coal as just rocks that you burn. But the reality of a coal bunker on a moving ship is much more volatile, isn't it?
Highly volatile. The constant shifting and grinding of the coal against itself as the ship moved created massive amounts of highly combustible coal dust. In the unventilated, pressurized, deeply hot environment of the ship's lower holds, that coal dust undergoes a chemical process of oxidation.
It literally starts cooking itself.
It begins to heat up entirely on its own. Spontaneous combustion in ship bunkers was a very real, incredibly common threat. A fire could start deep within the pile of coal, smoldering unseen for days before erupting into an uncontrollable inferno.
This is the ultimate claustrophobic nightmare. You are surrounded by millions of square miles of freezing ocean water. The environment outside is so cold it will kill you in minutes. And yet, you are trapped inside a burning, sealed piece of iron.
The contrast is horrifying.
The floorboards beneath your feet are getting physically hotter and hotter. Thick, black, acrid smoke is silently filling the lower corridors, suffocating the immigrants trapped in the steerage compartments.
The crew would be forced to fight the fire in the dark, suffocating bowels of the ship. Their only desperate option would be to open the sea cocks and intentionally flood the coal bunkers with ocean water to drown the flames.
Which is incredibly risky.
It is a terrifying, razor-thin margin of error. If you flood too much water into the hold, you destroy the buoyancy of the ship and you drag the vessel down to the bottom yourself.
You are trapped between two horrific deaths. The fire eventually forces everyone out onto the freezing, ice-slicked upper decks in the dead of night because the interior of the ship has literally become a massive oven. You are trapped between burning alive on the iron or freezing to death in the black water.
It is a harrowing mental image. However, from a purely analytical standpoint, the historical investigators noted this is the least likely of the three scenarios.
Really? Why is that?
The reasoning is deeply chilling in its simplicity. If a massive iron ship burned down to the waterline, there is almost always a vast debris field. A fire destroys the heavy iron, but it leaves the buoyant materials intact. Investigators would expect to find charred pieces of wooden masts, scorched cork lifebelts, splintered deck chairs, floating barrels.
Something would survive.
Anything floats away from a fire. But in the case of the city of Glasgow, not a single piece of charred debris was ever recovered from the Atlantic.
So, what does this all mean? We have these three incredibly vivid, scientifically plausible ways for 480 people to die in the dark. Theory 1. The instantaneous, violent kinetic shock of the iceberg. Theory 2. The agonizing, prolonged dread of structural failure and drifting helplessly in the trough of the waves. Theory 3. The claustrophobic inferno of the coal bunker fire. When you look at the mechanics of these events, which scenario is the most psychologically horrifying to you?
From a purely psychological perspective, the prolonged dread of the broken propeller shaft and the resulting structural failure is unparalleled. The human mind requires the illusion of hope to function, to stave off panic. To be trapped inside a freezing iron box, slowly rolling to death over a period of days, watching the water incrementally rise, watching the raw animal panic in the eyes of the hundreds of people trapped around you, and knowing there is not a single action you can take to change the outcome.
It's unbearable.
That is the purest, most undiluted form of horror. The iceberg is violent, but it is fast. The broken shaft is an agonizingly slow execution.
What makes this entire story so incredibly cruel is that even after the ship finally slipped beneath the surface, even after those 480 terrified people were dead and entombed in the deep, the ocean was not done inflicting pain. The trauma didn't end when the water closed over the funnel. It just transferred from the passengers to the families left behind. Because for months, this ship refused to simply stay dead in the public imagination.
The physical ship was obliterated, but the psychological aftermath was just beginning to tear through society. The families standing on the docks in Philadelphia and Liverpool were plunged into a devastating psychological state known as ambiguous loss.
Ambiguous loss, like not knowing if you should mourn or wait.
Exactly. When a person dies and there is a body or a funeral, the brain can begin the grueling process of grief. But without a body, without a single piece of wreckage or survivor's testimony, the human brain utterly refuses to accept the permanence of death. It clings desperately to any sliver of possibility.
And the newspapers of 1854, desperate to sell copies fueled by the public hysteria, fed that desperate hope with incredibly cruel rumors and phantom sightings.
They absolutely did. In late April of 1854, roughly a full month after the city of Glasgow was supposed to arrive, a massive, electrifying jolt of hope surged through the public. The captain of another transatlantic vessel, a ship called the Baldur, arrived in port and made a shocking report to the maritime authorities.
What did he claim?
He claimed that while navigating through the rough Atlantic swells, he had spotted a massive steamer drifting in the distance.
And he specifically reported the physical condition of this phantom ship.
Yes, he noted that the steamer was listing heavily to port. Mechanically, a severe list to port means the ship was tilting dangerously to the left side, likely taking on massive amounts of water in the lower compartments.
Which is catastrophic for a steamship.
It is. The list means the water in the boilers is shifting, exposing the heated metal tubes, causing a complete loss of steam pressure and propulsion. But crucially, the captain of the Baldur reported that despite the heavy list, the ship was still afloat.
Imagine being a mother or a husband reading that headline in the morning paper. The immediate, breathtaking gasp of relief. They are alive. The ship is broken. The propeller is dead. They are drifting and freezing, but they are alive.
You would immediately start clinging to that.
You instantly start doing the mental calculus of survival. If they drifted south, maybe the currents push them toward a shipping lane. Maybe another vessel can throw them a tow line. Maybe they washed up on a remote stretch of coastline.
The emotional whiplash of that specific moment in history is staggering to contemplate. Because shortly after that initial explosive report was published, the maritime investigators pressed the captain of the Baldur for more specific identifying details about the drifting steamer.
And it all fell apart.
Under scrutiny, the captain admitted the devastating truth. Upon closer reflection of the rigging and the funnel placement, the drifting ship he thawed did not match the distinct architectural profile of the city of Glasgow.
So it was just another ship in trouble?
It was entirely a different vessel in distress, or perhaps, given the exhaustion of the crew and the thick fog, an optical illusion created by the shadows of the massive swells.
The hope was violently, instantly snatched away. It is a literal second death for the families. They have to process the crushing grief all over again. But the ocean just kept playing these macabre, horrifying tricks. Let's fast forward to October of 1854.
6 months later.
We are now 6 full months into this agony, half a year of staring at the horizon. At this point, the rational part of almost everyone's brain assumes the ship is sitting at the bottom of the abyssal plain. But then the ocean spits something out. A piece of a ship's bow washes ashore on the jagged rocks near Campbelltown, Scotland.
And this was not just a random anonymous piece of splintered wood. The piece of the bow bore intricately carved, gilded letters. The investigators scraped away the seaweed and the salt, and the letters clearly spelled out, City of Glasgow.
The definitive proof. Finally. You can almost hear the collective, exhausted exhale of the hundreds of families. It is a horrific tragedy. It confirms the worst, but it is finally an answer.
A tangible end to the waiting.
The ship broke apart in the ice. Here is the physical, tangible evidence of its destruction. They can finally mourn. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. What actually happened with that piece of wood?
The discovery of that carved bow piece stands as one of the most devastating, statistically impossible twists of fate in the history of maritime disasters. Investigators traveled to Campbelltown to examine the wreckage. As they looked at the dimensions of the wood and the style of the carving, they realized a horrific truth.
It wasn't their ship.
It wasn't their ship. There had been another, much smaller coastal vessel, a completely different ship entirely, that by sheer coincidence was also named the City of Glasgow. And that smaller vessel had been operating in the treacherous coastal waters near Scotland around the exact same time and had struck the rocks and wrecked.
What are the mathematical odds of that? The ocean destroys the massive iron leviathan without leaving a trace, but it decides to spit out a piece of wood bearing the exact name of the ship everyone is looking for from a completely different wreck.
It's mind-boggling.
It's a decoy, a phantom piece of evidence. It feels incredibly dark. It's almost as if the sea itself is actively mocking the human attempt to find closure. The universe is playing a deeply cruel, calculated joke on these grieving families.
The discovery forces them violently right back into the void of ambiguous loss. The ambiguity returns with a vengeance. Did their loved ones freeze in the dark after striking an iceberg? Did they suffocate in a coal fire? Are they currently entombed inside a perfectly intact iron hull, sitting upright on the lightless abyssal plain 2 miles deep?
They would never, ever know.
The psychological torture of having definitive closure handed to you and then immediately ripped away based on a freak coincidence of a name is unimaginable.
And while the families are drowning in this endless, unresolvable grief, tearing their hair out over phantom ships and false driftwood, the corporate business world of 1854 moves on with cold, mathematical precision. Let's look at the financial aftermath of 480 vanishing souls.
We must examine the final note in the historical record regarding the machine itself, the insurance documentation. The city of Glasgow, this absolute marvel of Victorian engineering, along with its 1,200 tons of commercial cargo, was heavily insured by the underwriters.
How much was the payout?
The final payout for the total loss of the vessel was recorded at £50,000.
In 1854 currency, £50,000 is a staggering astronomical sum of wealth.
It was a monumental financial settlement. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights a deeply unsettling, almost grotesque contrast. For the businessmen, the shipyard owners, the wealthy investors, and the merchants who owned the vanished cargo, this horrific tragedy had a very neat, very tidy, mathematically perfect conclusion.
It was just a line item on a ledger.
Exactly. The iron ship was lost, the formal claim was filed with the underwriters, the massive sum of money was paid out, the corporate ledger was balanced, the £50,000 completely erased the financial deficit of the disaster. The businessman could simply take that massive payout, go right back to the shipyards of Todd and McGregor, and build the next iron ship.
The ledger is perfectly balanced for the men sitting in the warm mahogany boardrooms in London and Glasgow. But for the 480 families, the ledger is eternally bleeding.
There is no closure for them.
There is no underwriter payout that brings back the terrified mother clutching her children in the freezing water of steerage. There is no check that replaces the captain who went down in the dark wheelhouse. The stark, horrific divide between the cold, calculated mechanics of commerce and the bleeding, unhealed wound of human loss is glaring.
The corporate investors got their £50,000, and the families got rumors of ghost ships and rotting decoy driftwood.
It really exposes the brutal, underlying reality of the industrial age expanding its reach into the untamed natural world. To the machinery of progress and empire, human lives, especially the lives of desperate immigrants, were simply the inevitable, acceptable friction in the system. The machine kept moving forward, regardless of how many souls were ground up in the gears.
It's a very dark reflection on the era.
As we step back and look at the entire grim tapestry of the SS City of Glasgow, we are looking at the ultimate cautionary tale. We started with a Victorian marvel, a towering, fire-breathing iron fortress that was specifically engineered to conquer the uncontrollable element.
It was supposed to be the safest ship on the sea.
It was a beacon of desperate hope for poor immigrants trying to escape the horrors of the rotting coffin ships. It was the absolute pride of its engineers and captains. And in the dead of winter, it was completely and utterly obliterated by the indifferent, ancient, grinding forces of the Atlantic Ocean.
The story forces us to severely reflect on the immense, blinding hubris of new technology.
Yeah.
There was a profound societal belief that simply because we had learned how to rivet iron plates together and burn massive amounts of coal to turn a propeller, we had somehow tamed the most violent, unforgiving environment on planet Earth.
Nature always wins.
The ocean very quickly and very violently reminded humanity of its sheer, unconquerable power. An iron hull is nothing more than a fragile tin can when subjected to the crushing physics of the deep sea.
This event taps into a fear that is wired deep into the primal part of the human brain, the profound fear of vanishing, the fear of stepping off the lighted path into the dark and just ceasing to be.
Erased from existence.
Leaving behind no explanation, no wreckage, no final words for the people you love, just a silent, freezing void where a person used to be. The city of Glasgow wasn't just a shipwreck. A shipwreck implies wreckage. This was a mass disappearance into a watery black hole.
And it is a black hole that, even with all our modern advancements, we still haven't fully mapped or understood.
Which brings me to the final thought I want you, the listener, to carry with you today. Because it's incredibly easy to sit in our modern, comfortable homes, look back at 1854 and think, well, they were arrogant, they were blind, they didn't have radar or sonar or satellite telemetry. We would never, ever lose a massive ship like that today.
We like to think we're past that.
Right. But I want you to think about the sheer, unfathomable scale of the ocean. Even today, with our GPS satellites pinging from orbit, our deep-sea robotic submersibles, our advanced sonar mapping, the ocean remains a vast, unconquerable abyss. We possess higher resolution maps of the surface of the moon and the surface of Mars than we do of the abyssal plains of our own planet.
The deep ocean remains a realm of absolute crushing pressure and eternal, lightless, freezing darkness. It is an alien world right here on Earth.
So remember that pitch black, screaming expanse of the winter North Atlantic we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive? If a towering iron giant filled with roaring steam engines and carrying 480 screaming, fighting, terrified human beings, could simply vanish into the freezing dark in 1854 without leaving a single trace, without a whisper of physical evidence ever being found.
It makes you wonder.
How many other secrets are down there? How many silent tragedies, ancient wrecks, and lost souls are still waiting in the freezing depths, perfectly preserved in the absolute dark, completely and permanently forgotten by the world above?